everyone. My name is Aja Miller, and I'm an assistant editor at Stranger's Guide. We're an award-winning publication that commissions stories from local writers and photographers to build authentic portraits of a place, from Scandinavia to Tehran to Colombia and Lagos. Learn more about what we do at strangersguide.com or look for special global tickets spread around the festival. Welcome to Designing for Liberation. Today, I'm super excited to introduce Dario Calmese and Sekou Cook. Dario Calmese is an artist, urbanist, director, and brand consultant. In 2020, he was the first Black photographer to shoot a Vanity Fair cover with his portrait of Viola Davis and launched his podcast, The Institute of Black Imagination, featuring conversations from the pool of Black genius through the lens of design. Most recently, with Adobe Lightroom, he designed presets specifically for people of color. Sekou Cook is an architect, urban designer, research, and curator. Born in Jamaica and based in Charlotte, North Carolina, he is the director of the Master of Urban Design program at UNC Charlotte, the 2021-22 Nazir Jones Hip Hop Fellow at the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at the Harvard University, and a founding member of the Black Reconstruction Collective. Cook is a leading advocate for the study and practice of hip-hop architecture, which addresses the broad impacts of the racist history of architecture and urban planning, opening a pathway for practice, education, and scholarship that embraces architecture as a tool for shaping, reflecting, and understanding culture. If you have any questions, make sure you do those with the app and upvote them, and please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Okay. Good morning. Okay, all right, sorry. I am from the Midwest, and I grew up in a Black Baptist church. And we have this thing called call and response, which means that when I call, you respond. Good morning. Good morning. Okay. That is a really good start. So, I'm Dario Calmese. How am I here? How did I even get here? I think maybe we should start at the beginning. This is me, a little Black boy from St. Louis. I grew up in America's heartland with a father who was a pastor and a substance abuse therapist, and a mother who was a nurse and a seamstress. Now, they're retired, they're still alive. She actually made these clothes. Really interesting. I grew up in the suburbs, and I went to predominantly white high schools. I don't know if you can maybe find me in that choir photo. I'm kind of smack dab right there in the middle. And I did everything right? I stood up for the Pledge of Allegiance. I was taught that manifest destiny was a good idea. I was super curious. I studied Japanese just for the challenge of it. I got up early in the morning for AP European history. But what I never saw was myself. You see, I read Wuthering Heights, but I never read anything by Zora Neale Hurston. Anything that had to do with me was confined to 28 days at the beginning of the year. And it was always Martin Luther King, and it was always Harriet Tubman. But it was never James Baldwin, or Bayard Rustin, or Alma Thomas. I was taught about my struggle, but never about my imagination. It wasn't until I moved to New York and landed in Harlem years later that I discovered incredible writers like Countee Cullen and Sonia Sanchez, or amazing Harlem Renaissance painters like Aaron Douglas, or aesthetic aesthetes like Alain Locke, the first Black Rhodes Scholar, and who many consider the father of the Harlem Renaissance. These were my people. I did not have to be a basketball player in order to exist. I did not have to be an entertainer in order to exist. And I should know, because I was one. An entertainer, not a basketball player. I was an actor. I was a performer. And I traveled all around the world, and I loved it. But there was something missing. I wanted more. I realized that, yeah, sure, I could go out on stage and I could sing and dance and perform and help someone forget about their problems for about 2 hours. But they always had to go back home. And I couldn't quite figure out how to make that leap. I was always looking for a mentor, someone who was curious and weird and strange and scientific, but also creative and artistic. And I never found that person. And so as my not so love affair with performing began to wane, I started cheating with a camera. With this instrument, I found that I was able to use this scientific, rational brain and create something artistic. I could tell my own stories. I could show the world the way that I saw it, or the way that I wanted to see it. And I could document those people that I couldn't find in those history books, those ordinary, regular Black folk who were living extraordinary lives, like this sensitive young gentleman, well, not so young now, Ronald White, who actually happened to be the first Black man to appear on the cover of GQ. Or this incredible woman that I met at church, Lana Turner, who not only collects vintage clothes, but she dresses like this every single day. I call her the Oracle. And people began to take notice. And it was actually Miss Turner who introduced me to that mentor, a person named Jeffrey Holder. Now, Jeffrey Holder was an actor and also a dancer, but also a painter and a singer and a writer and a sculptor and a director. Many people know him as the director of Broadway's production of The Wizard of Oz, the all-Black version of The Wiz, the all-Black production of The Wizard of Oz, for which he won a Tony, the first Black man to actually win a Tony for Best Director, and he also did the costume design. But it was with Jeffrey that I finally found that individual who was moving through the world in this multivalent, dynamic way, someone who told many stories and just chose whichever medium best told the story. Shortly after meeting him, he passed actually, and Miss Turner and I went up to his loft. And this is what changed my life. I walked into this room and I saw sculptures and paintings and scripts and photographs and books and books and books, books up to the ceiling. And it hit me. It takes that much input to create an output like that. That what Jeffrey left behind was a roadmap, a blueprint to creativity. And it dawned on me that folk like me were denied access to information systematically over and over and over again, denied access to ourselves, to our dreams. And so I made sure I worked with his widow for years. Okay, I pestered his widow for years in order to keep those books together, in order to allow other Black and brown individuals access to that information. And I got the books, 2,000 of them. One of them in particular really changed my life. It's called Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And in it, he states that the burden of liberation is on the oppressed, not the oppressor. Because only the strength built by being oppressed do you have the power to liberate everyone. He said that the act of liberation is actually not about a transfer of power from the oppressor to the oppressed, because then they just become the new oppressor, something that we see happening around the world. But it was about a restoration of humanity, because by restoring humanity to those from which it was taken, you also restore humanity to those who lost it in the taking. The burden of liberation is on the oppressed? I mean, haven't they suffered enough? And then I thought about it. Those white guys on those parade floats in Chelsea in June during Pride Month wouldn't be there if it were not for two trans women of color who started the Stonewall Riots movement. Or the Southeast Asian cab drivers in New York who won't stop for me. Literally wouldn't be in the country if it were not for the Civil Rights Act, because immigration reform was buttressed by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That the largest beneficiaries of affirmative action are actually white women. And so, as my interest in the world began to grow, I found myself in Greece at a design fellowship. Now, don't ask me how I ended up at a design fellowship. I literally just wanted a trip to Athens, and here I was. And I heard a phrase that completely shifted my lens on reality. All design is predictive, meaning that the designer is predicting or dictating how the end user is going to interact with any given design. This, for me, was groundbreaking. Wait, what? The world we live in has been designed? This building, I mean, well, yeah, obviously, right? Design. But the chair you're sitting in, the glasses on your face, it was all once an idea. It was immaterial. It was just a thought in someone's head. We're literally living in embodied ideals. This shirt, this shoes, everything we touch was just once a thought. Just an idea, a thought that was no more valid or any more valid than a thought that's in your head. But not only was it designed, not only was it something, an idea made manifest, it was also designing me. It was beyond just product. It was just beyond the built environment. It was just beyond architecture, but it was social design as well. It was determining which places my body could go and not go. It was determining which bodies had value and didn't have value. It was shaping my thoughts, my opinions, my desires, who I was attracted to, what it meant to be a man or a woman. These are all just ideas. They're not real. There's no materiality to it. These are just prefab constructions that existed before we got here. And I believe that so much of what we're dealing with in the world even today is us trying to fit ourselves into these predetermined boxes that were designed before we arrived, but were not designed with us in mind. And when I look back, I realize if the world we live in has been designed, then who designed it? And for whom? What was the intention behind the design? And I see that by me hacking that design and giving myself different inputs, I was able to construct images like this, using references that never made it to my history books. References like Lorna Simpson using the color indigo, Alma Thomas, Carrie Mae Weems. That information, you want to answer that? that information was never meant for me to find out. Design is predictive, right? It wasn't by mistake. It was by design. Those inputs that I received were never meant for me to create incredible bodies of work like Jeffrey Holder. They were meant to keep me in my place. And if the burden of liberation is on the oppressed, what does it mean if we've been denied our stories? And so I use that camera, that instrument, to tell those stories, to tell the stories of the history of this country, a history that we're actually still fighting to tell today. I was able to direct fashion shows like the Pierre Moss fashion show at King's Theater and take my history in the church and bring a level of spirituality to something that can seem quite frivolous. Or my most recent fashion show at Madam C.J. Walker's house, the first self-made millionaire female in the United States, with models that wore designs inspired by the inventions of Black folk. The first Black designer, Kirby Jean Raymond, to show at Paris Couture Week. And these are images that were blasted around the world. And I saw that Black people have traditionally jerry-rigged and hacked and remixed these design systems, and in that process have not only invented cuisines and new genres of music, but have actually brought about the liberation of not only themselves, but many others as well. And so what does it mean if we take that ingenuity that created a jazz and we place it on cities? What does it look like in healthcare? What does it look like on design? I mean, I think we can all agree that these last 2 years have shown us this design isn't really working for us. And if we can judge a system by the outputs it creates, our rates of chronic illness, our dependency on prescription drugs, our growing political divide, increasing rates of isolation, who designed this? Who's benefiting from this OS? The bad news, the world we live in has been designed. But the good news is the world we live in has been designed. It's not fixed. It's malleable. These ideas that we find ourselves in are just ideas. They're no more valuable than the ideas that you have in your head. And so the state that we as citizens find ourselves in, political, social, institutional, has been designed. And we have to design our way out of it. Enter the Institute of Black Imagination.
To design a way out of this exclusionary system, we need Blackness. As expansive, complex, and diverse as the cosmos, as graceful as the way we move through spaces. It's alchemy, transforming base materials into cultural gold. It's subversive, hacking a world not designed with us in mind. It's exploration, seeking infinite possibilities. It's reinvention, it's world history, it's the way forward. Welcome to your Black imagination.
And to talk a little bit more about this and how we can hack and jerry-rig these systems that we find ourselves in, I would love to welcome to the stage my friend and colleague, Sekou Cook.
Good job. Thanks, man.
Sekou, welcome.
Thanks, great job.
Oh.
I enjoyed that. That was really fantastic.
Thank you, man. So this is amazing to be on stage with Sekou. It's a full circle moment. So much of the vocabulary that you heard in what I presented earlier, this idea of hacking, remixing, scratching, I actually received from Sekou during a presentation 5 years ago, and it completely unlocked a way of understanding the world that I was seeing. And it's really rooted in your practice of hip-hop architecture.
Correct.
And so could you explain to us a little bit about what hip-hop architecture is?
Sure. So I have a few images here as well. Hip-hop architecture is something that really germinated in the early 90s at Cornell while I was an undergraduate student there studying architecture. And there were a body of people there who were thinking about how they can take their own culture and program it into their own design work, which wasn't really something that was allowed for in most places. And then by the time I was in grad school in 2013, then the ideas came back up and I started to investigate it a bit more. So some of these things like Kara Walker's 2014 exhibition, Roughneck Constructivism, came to me and were really, really powerful and transformative. In there, she talks about being in search of a movement, looking for something that was based in a roughneck, antisocial hip-hop rude boy ethos. But even though the show was a show of visual artists and installation artists, she was looking for a theory of architecture. She was proposing a theory of architecture, and that just completely blew my mind that architecture could be part of this conversation. So when I talk about what hip-hop architecture is, I talk about the historical roots of hip-hop culture itself, that it came out of a very urban environment, that there is a very clearly designed framework that people were living in that didn't really meld with what they were, what they knew to be true for themselves. So they definitely had to hack that system and create a way out of that. So it's not coincidental that public houses work in the same gridded space as public schools and prisons as well. The second part of the hip-hop architectural theory is that each major movement in history, each major cultural movement, from the Baroque to the modernist movement to the postmodernists, have had some kind of resonance in multiple modalities, in theater, in music, in dance, in visual arts, and in architecture. In hip-hop, we have DJing, MCing, b-boying, graffiti, but we don't have architecture. Architecture is somehow missing in that whole piece. So after about 6 or 7 years of theory and investigation and research and finding different examples of this, I finally wrote this book, Hip Hop Architecture, that came out last year, to really dive into all of the different aspects of this, from the theoretical to the historical to the actual works that people are producing right now. I didn't have a whole lot of time to show a lot of that work here, but hopefully if you get the book, you'll see a lot of the work that's in there. But I'll show a little bit about, connecting some of the work that you saw back in 2017 to some of the work that I'm showing right now, which starts with thinking about the DJ as the original hackers of technology, right? So these are scenes that in public parks that they would do with these fans and all these different components jerry-rigged together with stolen electricity to make a party happen. But the basic move started with doing the one thing that you should never do, that your mother told you never ever to do, which is put your finger on the records. And that one act completely transformed this passive consumption tool into a musical instrument. is a complete shift in ideology. It now created a whole new genre of music and culture. And of course, Jay Dilla was the master of this in the mid-90s into the early 2000s, taking not just the turntable, but all these other elements, the drum machines, the laptop. You can see even a little iPod in the background there, and keyboards. So that was really foundational for me. And so some of that research that I was doing at that time was around the idea of 3D turntables. How can we hack the same tools that are used in architectural production of architectural ideas and designs, and hack that in a similar way that DJs hack the musical tools. So this is a quick video of some research that I'm doing now that connects. What you're seeing there is a 3D printer that is queued up with the same tools that we use for turntables. So that whole DJ turntable set is being grafted onto this 3D printed object. And instead of printing a simple primitive, what's happening is that the table is being shifted as the printing is coming out. So this is, again, not how you're supposed to use the 3D printer, but we're hacking it in the same way that the DJ was using that. And what kind of products it creates is what I'm investigating now. So there are some kinds of digital products that I've created on this level, drawings that are imagining buildings that come down and get deconstructed in very performative ways, or an ADU project that I developed in Los Angeles that the first prototype is being built now, or an installation that I did for the Chicago Architecture Biennial last fall, where a shipping container was chopped up and remixed in that same way. So these are the types of things that I'm really, really interested in. And I really have lots of questions for you in how these kinds of ideas start to overlap and intersect, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so interesting when you speak about this idea of really taking a design element, right, which is a record player that is designed, it is predicted, right? It is dictating that you're going to interact with it in a very linear and specific way, and it is in the actual subversion or the refusal of that not only do you get to be a rebel and disobey your mother, but you actually invent and create a whole new genre of music, right? Giving people a different level of access to themselves. And I think that's really incredible. And also a kind of vocabulary that when I looked back at my work, I saw that I was kind of doing as well.
So how's that idea of hacking that I planted in your brain 5 years ago, how has that really blossomed in your work?
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about the Vanity Fair cover, I think, let me see if we can pull that up. Just kind of like the DJ, there is a frame, right? There is a convention. There are specific notes that need to be hit, right? So this is a magazine cover. In a magazine cover, there's a level of aesthetics, there's a level of kind of boldness and being graphic, but it's actually about shifting the content within the frame. So using the frame, understanding the frame, but then completely shifting the content within the frame. And, it's really interesting because photographs, in a way, are also architecture. It's not real either, right? Like what I'm taking is an environment that is built. It is a constructed reality. There's something that's happening completely outside of the four frames. You don't see the hair person standing off to the right, and you don't see the videographer over to the left. All you see is this, right? So in a way, this is also architecture, and I'm combining those elements that I showed earlier, right? Those references of other Black women and the ways in which they represented themselves in order to speak to this time. And not only, if you look at what she's wearing, this is actually a coat. But I wanted to show her back, right? And so I took a trench coat, turned it backwards. So it's kind of almost the same thing, right?
And people are looking for that dress on the rack.
Yeah,
And can't find it, right?
no, exactly. But it's just like that, right? It's like me putting my finger on the record player and spinning it backwards. I literally took a trench coat, put it on her backwards, and opened it up in order to create this image. And so, so it's really imbuing and laying so much onto an image, even like American histories, right? So this is a reference of Whipped Peter, a runaway slave who was photographed in Philadelphia. And when I saw that, I, wanted to speak to the history. Now, let's remember, this was also during Black Lives Matter Part 87 in 2020 with the George Floyd protest. So I really wanted to speak to that. But even using the color indigo, like the history of indigo in this country is rife, right? Like it was actually more valuable than cotton, it was more valuable than tobacco. And the role that Black individuals had in the production of indigo is also quite devastating. It was considered the devil's tank, right, to actually be in the vat and stomp the indigo leaves. And indigo was so valuable, so valuable to American growth and ingenuity that the state of Georgia was actually not a slave state and became a slave state because the farmers were begging to be able to bring slaves in to produce indigo. And so that's actually how Georgia became a slave state, was through indigo. And so when you're looking at an image like the one of Viola Davis, you can see all of that, right? This is all imbued in this kind of construction or this level of architecture.
Awesome. So, yeah, so we also, I'm fascinated when I hear you talk about alchemy and taking ideas and turning them into reality. And I vibe with that a lot because, you know, when I talk to my students, I'm always talking about the power they have as designers that are taking ideas out of the ether, concepts, and visualizing them first, and then bringing them into reality. So, like, what are some of these, like, what are the things that you're bringing into reality? How are these things actually becoming tangible and real in your practice? What are the kind of outcroppings from the work that you're doing?
Yeah, you know, I love this idea. You know, again, going back to like this idea that all design is predictive. When I started to understand that like the world we live in has been designed, like, you know, outside of just like products or UX, UI or graphic design, but that it was also designing me, I kind of started to see the world as just other people's ideas. And my frustrations as just encounters with shitty design. I was like, why, who chose this? Like me being stuck in traffic in Boston at 11 a.m. on the way to the airport for no fucking reason. I was like, who decided it? Like, I'm stuck in it, right? And I'm frustrated. But this was decided 3 decades ago, right? And that is what we're in. Even when we speak about, you know, the idea of race, right? Like that's a construction. It's not a real thing.
Yep.
People look at us and they say, oh, those are 2 black guys, but the only thing black here are these seats and this shirt that I'm wearing. And so what are we actually speaking to, right? How does design actually obfuscate reality? How does it allow for us to completely ignore what we see, completely ignore our perceptivity, and react to these chimeras, to these shadows, right? These shadows on Plato's cave. You know, it's something that this 19th century philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach says, the preference for the sign versus the thing signified. And so once I was able to see the world through this lens, I realized that so much of what we're dealing with, so much what we're reacting to, are just stories, are just kind of silhouettes dancing. They're actually not even real. But to get to your question, I told you my father is a pastor. So to get to your question, how are these things manifesting? You know, one thing, for example, I accidentally hit the slide, but you know, something like this. Adobe presets. I worked with Adobe Lightroom in order to create a presets that were specifically designed for people of color. And what was so amazing about this project was that it really spoke to the idea that we can only be as good as the tools we have with which to manifest our ideas, with which to create our realities. And if there is oppression or omission, right, oppression by omission, in the actual design system, then we just continue to perpetuate that harm. And so, you know, this is something that is design, right? But if you look at it through the lens of sociality, you know, these identities that we have about, you know, gender and race and what does it mean to be in the West even, right? Like, what is the West? There is no West. There's no such thing. There's actually not even a such thing as America. It's an idea, it's a story. But we're reacting to it, and then we add a level of emotionality to it. But if we don't question it, if we don't interrogate it, then we can unconsciously perpetuate those harms. It's something that happens with AI right now, and the coded gaze and bias within in AI. And so this is one project that really speaks to the ways in which these ideas can be made manifest. Even circling back, you know, I introduced the Institute of Black Imagination. That is the second one, right?
which is what I'm super, super fascinated by, that this idea of imagination taking the center stage. And, you know, after the summer of 2020 and all the protests and all the focus on Black Lives Matter, architecture in particular got a big spotlight shone on it because it's one of the widest industries in America, in the world, really. And people have been asking about all this change. So all these different institutions and collaborations have been spawned through that, or came about around that, or had a new light shone on them. So there's like the Black Space Urban Collective, there is Dark Matter University, there's the BRC that I'm part of, the Black Reconstruction Collective, and then this Institute of Black Imagination seems to fit right into that really well. But these are all, most of these, almost all of them are institutions that started out before those protests, but just got this newfound excitement or attention. And I think that there's something really powerful about what you've put together, because this is something that started back in 2018, correct?
Yeah. I mean, it started actually even earlier than that. It really started with the books, right? So the Institute of Black Imagination began as an archive. I was originally going to call it the Holder Center for Black Imagination, named after Jeffrey Holder. But again, you know, as my artistic practice grew and I ended up in the world of design, I shifted the name to the Institute of Black Imagination. And it is a learning framework. And so we actually launched and started with a podcast in 2020. And there, again, it's my life story. I've just been looking for those mentors, looking for those stories that may not land in history books, right? That may not fit the demands of capital, because, you know, we traditionally have been at the genesis of creation, but rarely have we owned those methods of distribution and exhibition of information. And so I wanted to create a tribe of mentors, a pool of Black genius for other young Black and brown individuals to find themselves, to latch themselves onto a star, right, that could show them a possibility of being. Because, you know, it shouldn't have to be that hard to find yourself.
Yeah.
Like, no one should have to work as hard as I worked, like, and scoured to find these people. And so the idea of the Institute of Black Imagination is to close that gap and to make it just a little bit easier for people to discover themselves. And so it started with a podcast, which has incredible individuals. Like, you know, I spoke about AI. This next Sunday, we're releasing an episode with Timnit Gebru. And if anyone knows who Timnit is, she's a computer scientist who was hired by Google to be part of their ethics committee, and was later actually fired when she gave them a paper about the bias that was in their language learning software, and she created her own institute out of it. Or someone like Andre Leon Talley, who recently passed away. And also with the Institute, we're really looking at it through a framework of the past, the present, and the future. So the past being the archive, the present being bringing Black imagination into space and time, something that people can touch and feel and engage with, right? Again, if we know what Black music sounds like, what does Black space feel like, right? Like we don't have an understanding of what that lens of perceptivity looks like in the built environment, or we haven't been told. And we actually do, right? So there's Paul Revere Williams, who kind of invented the Hollywood look. So if you go to the LAX terminal, that cool like tower looking thing that looks like a spaceship landed was actually designed by a Black architect. And so we're actually existing in these spaces already, but we just don't know them. And why don't we know them?
Big question mark.
Right?
Exactly.
So that is what the Institute of Black Imagination is about. And then also thinking about the future. So a pedagogy, making sure that the next generation has the information that it needs in order to create its own and design their own more equitable futures.
Nice.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, speaking about access, I want you to talk about the website in a bit, but the website itself and show us a little bit about it. But just getting into the website, I consider myself a technophile, and I'm very good at puzzles and games. But it took me a while to get into the website because, and we talked about this. I was in a game. I was in a puzzle and didn't know I was in a puzzle. I was in a game without knowing that I was in a game. And that is a real mindfuck, right? like how do you get out of a cage where you don't even know you're in a cage? How do you get out of a game when you don't even know when you're in a game? How do you win a game that you don't know you've been put in to play, right? So, and I feel like this is part of the Black experience in America. I feel like this is, there's so many tangents, so many like analogies that this can be pulled from that. I don't know, like how do we, like, what was that decision like to make sure that there was this puzzle at the beginning of the website to just gain access to it? Yeah,
I mean, okay, wow, that's so much to unpack there.
Well, you started it with that puzzle.
So what Sekou is speaking about is IBI Digital, our public beta that we launched just actually a month ago at blackimagination.com. You can actually go on your phones right now. Put it into the server, blackimagination.com. You can't search for it, you have to put it in. And you are met with a game of sorts. And the reason that we put that there was really to allow people to engage their imaginations from the beginning. I think so much of our world, so much of our technology is just given, right? It's just access. It's passive. It's not engaging at all. It does not allow you to really engage and think and bring yourself to it. The mic guy is gonna kill me. But bring yourself to it, right? So for me, that's really exciting that all of a sudden you have to be met with the present and you have to figure it out, right? And it's easy, guys. Sekou's making it sound like mad difficult.
No, it's super easy, except if you know it's a game, you can figure it out. But there was a step you had to go through. It's like, there's a puzzle
because
here.
it has to bring you into the present. How many times have you walked past people on the street and they're just scrolling, or people are sitting there at the TV just watching, and life is just washing over you, right? These are just designs. These are just images that are being fed to you, and you're not questioning them. You're just passively accepting them, passively agreeing to them. And you can then also unconsciously perpetuate them. And so this is a moment to just bring you right to the present, right? And then also engage your own imagination, because then you have to start asking your own set of questions. Okay, what is this? And how do I get in? And so it's really fun to watch because like my 87-year-old grandmother got it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
sorry, Sekou.
I gotta get grandma's number.
But it brings you right in, it brings you right into the present. And you have to decide, right? Do I give up? Do I keep trying? Do I ask someone else? And I find that it's actually how people navigate their lives, right? Like if you want to get to something, if there is something that is beyond your reach, you have to try a couple of things, or maybe talk to the person to your right or to your left and ask them, how do I do this? Or maybe you just put it down and give up. And I find that that's how many other people live their lives, right? Like not realizing that on the other side of you just trying a couple of things out is an entire world waiting for you. And so in a way, yes, it becomes that. And then you also spoke a little bit, something like a little bit more existential. I know you're looking at the time.
Well, I know you want to show us a little bit of that.
Oh,
and I know
yeah,
that
right, the website, yeah.
And we also wanted to take some questions from the audience. I know there's an app that you're supposed to be using. I've never used the app, so I can't tell you how to do it. And we have a few questions there. So do you want to show the
yeah,
first?
Let's
go to the video if we can.
I'll just show you just a little bit here. So once you get in, we actually gamified the entire site. And the reason that we designed it this way was to really think about access from the genesis of design. So access is one of the pillars at the IBI. And we had a team of 16 people from around the world working simultaneously in New York, LA, Uganda, Nigeria, and Sao Paulo. And one of the team members said, well, if you want to create this, let me tell you, you can't make an app because there are black folk in favelas who don't have phones that can download apps. And so we actually created a website that behaved like an app, that was gamified, that was like a little game in your pocket that could show you all of the incredible things, well, not all, but many of the incredible things happening around the world, and to give other people access to it. And you can access it from a phone, a PC. You know, we completely got rid of the OS and Google, the divide, OS Android, right? The OS Android divide, which is also a socioeconomic divide. And then we also wanted to create a really unique version of our podcast player because podcasts are audible, right? But what does it look like if it is visual as well? There we go. I took the sound off, but essentially we created a visual podcast player. So you can actually go into the website and experience our podcast in a completely new way. If you want to project it onto your TV or project it onto your wall, you totally can. So you can actually be in the actual audio of the podcast. Okay, a couple of questions. Let's pull it up.
Yeah, very, very beautiful. I could just sit there and watch that the whole day. I think I used to do that with my audio player as well. But yeah, so the first question we have, what's something that gives you hope? You know, we talk about, you know, making sure this presentation was more about imagination, about what's possible, what's there in the future. And a lot of, you know, we've heard a lot of sob stories of people talking about like what's the problem and outlining their problems, outlining all the things, the struggles they've gone through. But what is giving you hope, as Mona is asking here?
Yeah, Mona, hey. What gives me hope is that we are on our path, right? And I believe that when Martin Luther King says that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice, that's the way that I see, right? So I pull back from reality, right, from my present day, and I can see we are actually iterating and growing and shifting and changing in real time, really fast, right? We are actually becoming a more equitable society. When I think that gay marriage was just legalized in 2015, and now we have a trans woman winning, you know, an Emmy just a few years later, right? Like, so that is what gives me hope. What gives me hope are the youth. Like, I don't know if any of you all teach or have young children, but they are right up to speed. They do not have to be convinced of anything. They completely understand the world that we live in. And then what also gives me hope is that we are having this dialogue. We're having this dialogue here at South by Southwest. My hotel, I'm staying at the Line over here across the street, and we won't talk about why there's Palo Santo in my room and the ways in which like the deforestation of like indigenous sacred practices are being swept up in capitalism. However, if we're having a conversation about like just a general conversation about self-care and like wellness and taking time for yourself, like these are the things that give me hope, right? That people have taken a moment to just think and decide, is this what I want to be doing?
Yeah.
Those are the things that give me hope.
Brilliant,
Sure.
yeah. We also won't talk about the image of George Bush washing meat.
Okay, Sekou, go.
Next one.
Cocktail hour conversation.
So non-Black folks, people will use your words and thoughts to give an impression of allyship, right? I'm sensing that this question is not really understand or not really in favor of allyship or thinks that allyship may not be a real thing. But how do you combat people giving the impression of allyship when it may not be sincere?
Ooh, that is a tricky question. And I think we have to unpack it a few layers, right? On one level, it sounds like one is having a reaction or a projection or an assumption that someone is not necessarily an ally. And I think it's really, and I see if you talk about what gives me hope, I believe that we're all doing the best we can, right? And if that is the case, then that is how I approach individuals. Now, if that is something that provides that is caustic or is impeding my movement, then yes. But a level of allyship, right? The Congress was not full of Black people when they signed the Civil Rights Acts. The Congress was not full of Black people when they at least began Reconstruction, right? Or even took back slavery. So this is about all of us. This is actually not a conversation just around what does it mean to be Black in America, but really it goes beyond race. It's about how are we all a part of this, and how can we all live more equitable futures? We're all here, right? And I think that race, if we speak about it as a construct, then we have to figure out who designed that and what was their intention behind that design, right? That was based in capitalism. It was a structure that was created in order to convince ordinary, regular citizens that these people were not human in order to create an industry, an extractive industry that went back to Europe and to those in power. That is what it is. We are living in answers to questions, and so it's an illusion.
And we talked about earlier, how whiteness depends on Blackness to even create what whiteness is, right? It doesn't really exist in the way that it exists today without Black people, without the histories of Black people. And it's like Black History Month is like everybody's History Month. It's not just about Black people. So if we're looking at it from that framework, then we understand that allyship is not really about helping somebody else out. It's about creating a world that's equitable for everyone. Everyone, you have to be invested in making things better or creating a better framework for Black people to exist within in order for your life to improve, right?
Yeah, it's like when I mentioned earlier Paulo Freire, when he says that liberation is not about a transfer of power, but about a restoration of humanity. Because by restoring humanity to those from which it was taken, you also restore it to those who lost it in the taking.
Yeah.
And I think the myth of whiteness, in a way, is that you somehow also are not losing out in this.
Yeah.
And I think when we look at the world and what we are in, right, the state of it is that great losing, right? That is it. When you look at who is leading this, right, who has created this, and this is not all, it is very specific people, right? It's beyond whiteness. It's about capital.
Yep. Yep. Always about the money.
It always comes back to capital.
Follow the money, and you get all the answers to the questions. This is a sweet question. You talked a bit about your background. You started as a child in St. Louis. Here's a question about your first black teacher. At what age did you have your first black teacher, especially being in a predominantly white school? Or did that even happen?
This is really interesting.
Benjamin Howard has stumped the guest.
I had my first, it's kind of an A and B answer. I had my first black teacher in high school. I was supposed to have my first black teacher in high school, Miss Piku, and she taught chemistry, and she actually died before classes started. So I never took that from Miss Piku. And so we can talk about, weathering in black women's health, but that was Miss Piku. And then the time I actually did have a black professor was not until I went to undergrad. And so maybe my second or third year, a nun, Sister Susan, I went to a Jesuit school, was my teacher, and she was tough as nails.
Yeah.
So,
was that impactful? Did that help shape in any way who you were?
Sekou, this is a whole nother conversation.
we probably don't have time for that.
Because she came for me. She came for me. But maybe she saw something, so she pushed me. I don't know, but it didn't feel like that.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one final question, and it comes back to the IBI. Does the Institute of Black Imagination plan to equitably educate Black people with less access to education?
Absolutely, absolutely. So when I spoke about the past, right, the archive, the present, bringing Black imagination into space and time, and then the future, the pedagogy, right? And so we are developing a pedagogy that will act almost kind of like a Hebrew school, so that will actually be tangential to traditional education for Black and brown youth in order to dream and access their imagination, loosely based around STEAM. Science, technology, engineering.
Fantastic. Perfect. Thanks, Dario. This has been fantastic. This has been fun. And it's so much fun for me to continue some of the conversations we've had, make some of them public. I'd love to have some of our conversations recorded and made public, because they've always been really inspiring. So thanks for that. And thank you all for coming. Thanks for participating. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of South by Southwest. Thanks again.